When I heard Lewis's name, I was like, yeah, typical high-profile recruitment, which is highly coveted and dirty.
So Leo Lewis was a top linebacker prospect, probably the best kid in that state that year in Mississippi.
I want to be big, fast, and physical, and I want to be best at every aspect of the game.
He's a commodity. He's instantly drawing attention from everybody, and what that means almost all the time, if you're a 4 or 5-star talent in the state of Mississippi, it means both the major schools are coming after you, as well as some other neighbors, and that you're gonna get a lot of money from a lot of places. And that's how business gets done in Mississippi.
My name is Stephen Godfrey, and I'm a senior reporter for SB Nation. I'm investigating a series of allegations brought against Ole Miss by the NCAA.
When you're a young black athlete that is coming up poor in Mississippi and somebody validates your existence and says, my school wants you because you can play football, obviously that becomes like dollar signs in the eyes.
Everybody wants to say it's not a professional sport. Of course, the same people who are making that argument are reaping millions.
Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the union. So what would you do? You got a daughter, your father's in prison, and your mom's trying to pay for a house she can barely afford. Hell yeah, I'd take the money. Are you crazy?
A lot of kids take money, but when you're the top recruit in Mississippi, which produces more NFL Hall of Famers per capita than any other state, in the middle of the most bitter rivalry in the nation, that money comes with real consequences. It took me 5 years to answer some of these questions. Who sabotaged LAREMY TUNSIL?
It's a 5-year-long soap opera. You couldn't write it better.
What causes corruption in college sports?
Bombshell would be an understatement tonight in Oxford.
Why do players keep getting targeted?
There's been cheating in college sports since the dawn of time.
And what is a bagman?
Follow me down to Jordan Street. God's gonna trouble the water.
How you doing, sir?
Stephen Godfrey, how are you? So it's fall 2014, and my investigation brings me back to Mississippi to look into the illicit ways that colleges recruit fresh talent. I've been coming to Oxford, Mississippi for this story specifically for years now. It's just grown more and more surreal. At Ole Miss, the number of high-ranking high school players that came to the school as part of the 2013 signing class had lots of people speculating that the school was paying players. That prompted the NCAA to deepen their investigation into Ole Miss and their alleged compensation of players like LAREMY TUNSIL in exchange for a commit to their school. So now they have to recruit in the middle of an open NCAA investigation.
Once you're done with one recruiting class, you pop in the tapes, you look at who's the best players in your own state. And certainly, if you're in the state of Mississippi, you were not going to miss Leo Lewis. He was one of the best players in the state.
Hugh Freeze is recruiting fearlessly, aggressively.
His assistant athletic director, Barney Farrar, was Lewis's point of contact throughout the entire recruitment period.
Every program has a dude like Barney Farrar. If a high school player's coming up, he goes and meets parents, gets that hug, gets that high five at the end of games saying, hey, this school is here to watch you. That's Barney. He's got a big Rolodex full of very good high school athletes that he is making sure to keep comfortable.
Most of this exists within the realm of legality. You can go watch a kid play, shake his hand, but that role allegedly expands into something very much off the books because the task of recruiting star talent in Mississippi means establishing a close personal relationship with the people that are going to influence not only Lewis, but his family as well. For coaches, recruiters, and bagmen, this means you're trying to win over families that live in the poorest state in the country.
Hey, you there?
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna jump right in. If you're with a family for a year or two or sometimes more, you should be able to let them know that an amount of money is coming after the kid signs. And the family should believe you.
Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the union. You know, there are issues with access to electricity and water and normal utilities that the rest of us take for granted.
If you look at Mississippi high school sports and what Mississippi does really well, though, it tends to be football.
I think this gets back to the pressures of poverty. The need is greater for financial support. Those sorts of families and student athletes and communities are going to be more amenable to certain overtures, quite frankly.
I think if you're talking about sports in the South, you have to understand that there is a legacy and a history of racial discrimination and segregation.
Mississippi has a particularly dark history. It produced more cotton than any other state in the South, and it also had the second highest number of slaves in the country. And it wasn't until 1962 that a black student, James Meredith, was even admitted to the University of Mississippi.
His entry causes riots, and it's a permanent black mark on the university's history, right? That we went to such amazingly great lengths to keep change and progress from happening.
And yet in America today, black athletes represent a majority of the on-field talent generating revenue in college sports. The problem is the athletes themselves are cut completely out of that revenue stream. I just picked up early on that what I was actually writing about was something so much larger than a sport. It's a religion, it's a market. All the social context that you need to explain the South, it's there. I think you can do it all through college football.
The sheer lunacy, the reverence that people have for college football specifically is unmatched.
The stakes are really, really high. Even though college players aren't paid, the coaches are paid millions of dollars, and obviously that's for winning.
You've got two schools, warring tribes that hate each other beyond comprehension, beyond measure. The University of Mississippi, Ole Miss in Oxford, and in Starkville, Mississippi, Mississippi State. And you're talking about a world in which football is king 365 days a year. However, the cultures at each individual school are two very different things.
The University of Mississippi Corinthian columns and its beautiful architecture and landscape, Old South, antebellum, seersucker bow tie sundress, a liberal arts school that develops lawyers and doctors, versus Mississippi State University, founded in Starkville, 93 miles to the south.
Starkville's a blue-collar community where a lot of people, grew up the descendants of farmers or people that worked every day out in the sun.
We're just a tight-knit community. We revolve around the university, and when we say we're family, we mean it.
Ole Miss versus Mississippi State is a little bit of old money versus no money.
In a lot of great college football rivalries, you have to have a stark contrast. And Oxford to Starkville is a stark contrast.
I think people from outside Mississippi struggle to understand just the level of hate they had.
The internet is loaded with countless examples of both sides talking trash. YouTube trolling, Photoshop memes, signs at tailgates, elaborate tattoo designs, and this guy.
You do not stand a chance against Dak Prescott and the #1 Mississippi State Bulldogs.
It's that bitter a rivalry just because of the fact that we hadn't had a whole lot to cheer about in the state of Mississippi, and so it's kind of like we may not be the best, we may not be Alabama, we may not be LSU, but we're better than you.
And recruitment time is when that rivalry really plays itself out. Mississippi State hires a coach in 2008 named Dan Mullen. He's basically the quarterback guru for Tim Tebow at Florida, and he takes Mississippi State from a perennial basement-dwelling football team to a consistent winner. And that's no small feat. Mullen's not particularly enigmatic. He doesn't win a living room, but he makes up for that with football smarts. He figures out early on that the best way to build equity at Mississippi State is to do one thing, and that is to constantly screw with Ole Miss. He calls them the school up north.
I had a high school coach come up and say, the amazing thing I've seen in this state, and he's an alum of the school up north. I see Mississippi State here everywhere I go. It's like there's only one school in the state. And we took a lot of pride in that because you have done that. We have created this atmosphere of excitement.
Not saying the rival's name robs them of any identity or location.
And Dan Mullen is, in so many ways, everything that Hugh Freeze isn't. The guy's from up in the Northeast in New Hampshire. He's abrasive. He likes to get under Ole Miss's skin. And I think there's a pretty healthy dislike right off the top of the bat with these guys.
both equally competitive, both savage in terms of recruiting and in terms of trying to get an edge on and off the field, but very, very dissimilar in terms of manner. Hugh Freeze would be very churchy. He'd want to talk about your feelings. The last thing Dan Mullen would ever want to talk about is your feelings, all right?
So now the rivalry's really on. Freeze is trying to out-recruit, but also out-flash Mullen. He starts going after prospects that he should have absolutely no business going after.
Typically, if you're going to be a good recruiting school, you've got to own your own backyard and then cherry pick from other areas.
Technically, in Mississippi, everyone's backyard belongs to both Ole Miss and Mississippi State. They're both very close together, and they both share a lot of the same recruiting territory. Where my backyard becomes my backyard, definitely not yours, is when I have a relationship with a high school coach, or when I have a relationship with an assistant coach, or somebody close to the recruit. And those networks in particular are very intimate, very personal, and very interconnected in a place as small as Mississippi.
One of the things that escalated the rivalry is that Freeze and Ole Miss were recruiting in areas right around Mississippi State University. You can understand that this is something that would drive Dan Mullen insane.
Ole Miss is recruiting Starkville now. Hugh Freeze is going for the jugular. Ole Miss successfully recruits A.J. Brown, a wide receiver from Starkville, Mississippi that Mississippi State wanted badly. Ole Miss is also trying to recruit Kobe Jones.
This is a kid that literally goes to Starkville High School.
So now it's time for Mississippi State to step up their recruiting game, and Leo Lewis is someone that most programs in the country would love to have. He's in a small town in Mississippi called Brookhaven, and for Mississippi State, this is crucial recruiting territory.
Ole Miss is recruiting him heavily, LSU's recruiting him. There's a lot of competition for him, and thus there is reportedly a lot of money coming in to try and convince him of their program.
I really believe Leo Lewis is going to end up at Mississippi State or Ole Miss, nowhere else. He showed up in Oxford this weekend.
That's going to be one of the hottest in-state recruiting battles, really going down to National Signing Day.
As the picture becomes more clear where certain kids are signing, schools become more desperate because the competition for players is just so fierce.
Now here's the hard thing about getting commitments. There are no contracts. You cannot sign anything. There is no way of saying, all right, if I pay you this, you're locked in, we've got a deal here, you're coming. There's none of that. You just have to hope the kid sticks by his word. If he doesn't, what are you gonna do? Tell the police that I tried to illegally bribe a kid to come to my school and he decided to go to a different school? You can't do anything about it. And that leads to some interesting situations. Leo Lewis sort of implicitly understood that these programs couldn't do anything to him if he took money from multiple schools. This leads to this insane situation where Leo Lewis is not playing exactly by the rules that kids are supposed to play by. Most of the rules are, a bunch of schools offer you some money, you pick one, you take that money from them, you tell the others sorry. From what we're told by lots of people familiar with the case, Leo Lewis was taking money left and right.
That fall, you heard so many Leo Lewis stories. You know, he originally committed to Alabama, and then he committed to Ole Miss.
You know, I'm blessed to be in the position that I'm in. It's been crazy, you know, lots of people come, you know.
Talking to him a little bit at Big Dog Camp, and he said, you only get to do this once, so he's gonna explore all his options in no rush. He told me that he will not make a decision anytime before November, so he's not in any rush to commit again.
So essentially what Leo does is he plays the open market for as long as humanly possible. Why does he do that? So he can generate as much money as possible. It's actually pretty smart.
This leads to a lot of fear with the programs that are recruiting him.
I remember talking to someone at Alabama. Man, this Lewis kid, that deal's weird. We're out of that.
When it comes to recruitment, a head coach might tell someone like Barney, hey, let's make sure we get that kid. A recruiting specialist like Barney knows exactly what that means. From what we're told, Ole Miss and all their boosters are freaking out about where Leo is gonna commit. There's no real sense about where this kid's gonna go, and Barney's job kind of depends on getting kids like this to commit to his school. This leads to him recording a conversation with Tina Henderson, who's Leo Lewis's mom, in which he's prying and trying to find out what Leo is going to do.
something's starting to click in his mind the last few days. You know it? And that's what we want, Tina. That's what we want. I want you to be careful them folks calling you now. Don't let them get you, don't let them folks get you and Nino in trouble now.
I know it.
Farrar is trying to talk Henderson out of the bidding war that she says is going on for her son.
Like I said, I don't know nothing about all this recruiting stuff. I'm just not learning. But I hope I don't ever have to go through it again.
It begs the question, why is Barney recording this phone call? If Barney's concerned about being double-crossed or maybe someone's gotten to Tina Henderson or Leo Lewis, it's not without precedent. Bottom line is this. Barney, this close to National Signing Day, is recording Tina Henderson because he's worried.
You know, Ole Miss really thought they had Leo Lewis from the start. And then the news breaks, Leo Lewis has decided to join Mississippi State.
The Old Brook linebacker decided to be a Bulldog.
I made my decision this morning, you know, last-minute decision.
For Ole Miss, this is nothing less than just a total failure.
Dan Mullen and the Mississippi State Bulldogs score a huge win.
So Leo Lewis, regardless of what you want to believe about which school did what, he's a little cash heavy after National Signing Day. Nobody can argue that, right? So he's young, he's rich, right? He's got all this cash, he takes it home. He does what any good millennial would do. He puts it on social media. So this is about the dumbest thing that a human being could do. FYI on Snapchat, it's public. That's the whole point. By its design, it's supposed to be a temporary video that disappears. Someone decides, hey, you know what? I'm gonna take a video of that video of the original Snapchat, and my video of that Snapchat video, that's going to YouTube. But what he doesn't know is that video is going to come back to haunt him. So in January of 2016, the NCAA hands down what's known as a notice of allegations. A notice of allegations is essentially an outline of all the rules that the NCAA thinks that an institution has broken.
In the notice of allegations from the NCAA, 28 total were on there. 13 of them, just about half of them, were football violations.
So Ole Miss gets this notice of allegations, and they go into spin mode. And what they do is they have a new coach in Hugh Freeze, and that frees up an old coach who can be made sort of the fall guy of this, and that's Houston Nutt. So basically what Ole Miss does is they say, that happened all under that old guy. We don't really know what was happening, but listen, we want to make things right. Houston Nutt's gone. Hugh Freeze is a Bible-quoting angel.
Freeze and people in the administration start really kind of pushing out to media.
They contact ESPN and the Associated Press. They contact me and they tell us, hey, it's not that big a deal. The investigation's over and everyone's moving forward. That's it and that's all. And then this NFL draft night happens. And now all of a sudden, we have an image. It appears that Ole Miss was arranging payments for one of their best players. The NCAA looks completely inept at policing their own recruiting rules. So Ole Miss embarrassed the NCAA on the biggest night of the NFL draft. And this leads to the NCAA trying to ramp up the investigation against Ole Miss.
For the NCAA investigators, it works kind of like any investigation you'd see in any cop show, you know? You need to get witnesses, you need to get them to flip. If you're looking into Ole Miss, most current players, they love their team, and they're not gonna wanna talk about their institution. Likewise, former players of Ole Miss, like LAREMY TUNSIL, if the NCAA calls you and says, come sit down and talk with us for a few hours about impermissible benefits you got in Ole Miss, they're gonna say, fuck you, I've got millions of dollars, I'm in the NFL.
So the NCAA doesn't have subpoena power over people that are not under its jurisdiction. They can't go make LAREMY TUNSIL testify. LAREMY TUNSIL is no longer an NCAA athlete.
So the NCAA stumble upon an idea, which is if Ole Miss players aren't going to talk to us, and former Ole Miss players who we believe were really involved in these shenanigans aren't going to speak to us, maybe Mississippi State players will. A lot of these schools are recruiting the same kids. You might be willing to find kids who are perhaps a little more eager to talk, because hey, it's their rival, The program itself, the Mississippi State program, might say, hey, sure, you can talk to our player if he's going to be talking about Ole Miss and not talking about us. That's great. And if your head coach allegedly is telling you, we want you to talk to the NCAA, what's the big deal?
And now at this point, student athletes at Mississippi State, a couple of them volunteer to talk to the NCAA. You've got two kids at Mississippi State, Jeffrey Simmons and Kobe Jones. They don't initially talk to Mike Sheridan in the actual Miss investigation. They talk to someone in the NCAA's development department, which is sort of like an open tip line for schools and players to report infractions. Now, I can't really emphasize enough how strange it is that someone from the culture in which these kids come from would volunteer to talk to an authority figure. It just doesn't make sense. This leads a lot of people to speculate that Mississippi State has inserted themselves into the investigation of their rival, because shortly thereafter, a third Mississippi State player, Leo Lewis, shows up in interviews around the Starkville area with Mike Sheridan. Now, Mike Sheridan and the NCAA record these interviews. They're part of the official record. The leaks are a major part of how this story has unfolded, and also now I have those transcripts. He basically tells the NCAA that when he was visiting Ole Miss, he went to a shop called Rebel Rags, which is your standard college apparel store. He says he goes into Rebel Rags and he's gifted $400 worth of merchandise. As Rebel Rags is technically an Ole Miss booster, this is, of course, impermissible by NCAA rules. Leo talks specifically about how he sees security tags being removed from the clothing. It gets put into a bag, they swipe something behind the counter, he calls it a gift card, and that takes care of the transaction. Rebel Rags denies these allegations, but in the big picture, it doesn't matter, because Leo Lewis also tells the NCAA about gifts a lot more valuable than some free t-shirts.
There's cash payments he talks about. He talks about receiving gifts of $500 and $800.
The NCAA has a tool called limited immunity, and the goal of a limited immunity offer is to get a student athlete to talk very specifically about the alleged benefits that they received by offering them immunity. They won't lose their eligibility. Nothing's going to happen to them in their collegiate career. So in theory, they should be more willing to talk about the benefits or inducements that they did receive. So the big moment that happens is Leo Lewis says that Barney is the man who introduced him to this man named Alan. Alan is, according to Leo, the man who paid him. He's the bagman. Alan is bagman Y. The culmination of this relationship with bagman Y is that he pays him $10,000 right before signing day to go to Ole Miss. This happens the day before signing day. They meet in a parking lot, and there's a gift of $10,000 cash with the implicit instruction, swear on your daughter's life that you will attend Ole Miss. This moment, this alleged meeting in the parking lot is everything that the NCAA has hoped for in this case. Ole Miss starts to realize, well, you know, we might be able to fight one allegation of one payment on one day, right? But we can't fight all of this. We can't fight the litany of evidence that traces Barney all the way back to LAREMY TUNSIL's draft night messages asking for money. All of these text messages between the bagman Alan and Barney Farrar. There are these alleged conversations between Barney and Leo. Barney is the recurring character throughout all of this. He's the university employee. You can't do anything about that. It's at this point in December of 2016, as the season's drawing to a close, Ole Miss fires Barney Farrar. Now, the firing of Farrar is very foreboding. I think in certain circles at Ole Miss, Barney was seen as maybe a sacrificial lamb, given up to appease the investigative side of the NCAA. Who actually was responsible for this? I have trouble believing that with the frequency Barney Farrar was allegedly contacting Leo Lewis, his boss, Hugh Freeze, had no knowledge of what was going on. Farrar emphatically denies most of the allegations against him, but Ole Miss is attempting to portray him as a rogue staffer. After Barney's fired, Leo Lewis is interviewed a final time, and Ole Miss's lawyers present another attempt to discredit the NCAA's witness, the recording of Barney Farrar speaking to Leo Lewis's mother during recruitment season.
Well, here's what I'm gonna say. What did you say, LSU, they threw what figure out?
60.
Yeah.
And Mississippi State hated it.
It's Ole Miss's hope to discredit Leo and to prove that other schools were willing participants in this bidding war over him, in an effort to show that Ole Miss is being unfairly singled out. If the NCAA finds Ole Miss guilty, their entire football program could grind to a halt. And if any part of Leo's testimony is found to be false, his immunity could potentially be revoked, and his brief football career could come to an end. You have to understand, compensating college football players, it's the most interaction, especially in a place like Mississippi, that affluent whites are ever going to have with poor blacks. If you're throwing around cash in Mississippi, everybody's gonna know eventually. It's incredibly hard to hide things in small communities, and that's all Mississippi is. There's no 6 degrees in Mississippi. It's like 2.5 at best. This is culturally tolerated. We will tolerate a certain level of this kind of stuff if we think it's good for our team. It's hard to reckon with that when the positive connotations of fandom are affected by negative origins. And a lot of people don't want to accept that. The road ahead leads to more coaches getting fired, more trouble for Leo Lewis, lawyers crawling out of the woodwork, and a confrontation between Ole Miss and Mississippi State that leads to violence, deception, and a conspiracy you won't believe.